All right, folks, welcome back. It is day 22. 皆さん、お帰りなさい。今日は、日目です。So, we're gonna wait. So, I was supposed to plan on doing the day one, part one of the Duolingo review, like Duolingo Japanese review. But I think we're going to play it safe and wait for this rotation of the radicals to happen. So we're gonna move it for the next 2 days, which kind of frees up time for me to finish my Chinese side of things. But anyways, so today is we're gonna get maybe a few characters, because I see Spoon, Spoon, Winter, Dry, and Canopy maturing. So I do see a couple things like Hiro. This is probably not Hiro because they usually use Onyomi readings, but Hiro would actually hitting. I think. Actually, I don't know. We'll find out. Oh, I see Huyu, or they might Dong. I'm not sure if there's a read that's similar to Dong. Maybe. So there's some interesting ones coming up. I have 139 reviews, which pretty reasonable, not too bad. Or I mentioned and reflected upon the volume, right? Not too bad. I would say even to the upper limit of 500 would be fairly reasonable. But 139. Let's get into it. We didn't have, so the beginning we would look over our mistakes and whatnot, so we did not have one yesterday, or like any lapse of judgment or distraction. We're gonna hit it right off the bat and hit our reviews. All right, here we go. Okay. Wait, yeah. Lots of radicals today. Oops. Oh, that's a typo. That's okay. That's a typo. That's a typo. I hit L instead of D. Dang. It's a shame that there's no large safeguards for typos. It slows down dramatically when you're needing to consider typos. Oops. One could make an argument, well, you know, you should get more accurate at typing. Not everyone types all the time. You know, I listen, I read, I write. So that would be very, very presumptuous. Oops, I did it again. Because these errors are not necessarily reflective of knowing what the term means or not. So single entry is, in my opinion, not sufficient. There should be like a toggle for 1+ mistake or something. Maybe there is. I'll go look later. I think that would become a problem, in my opinion, would become an issue in the future. Largely due to the nature that how things are unlocked are in series as opposed to based on consistency. Wait, well, it is sort of, but it's like an all or none advancement as opposed to like you have done it so often and you've maintained a specific percentage and therefore it moves forward. Obviously, you can script all of this, but I'm curious what type of options or utilities they have built in. I'm probably not going to change it for now, though. Something for the future to think about. Yes. Oops. Oh, I was asking for something else. That was asking for the meaning, not the read. Yeah, so no safeguard there, obviously. Pretty sure, unless I typoed. Oops. Yeah, that would have been marked as wrong as well. What did they accept here? See. Yeah. Good morning. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to add a synonym for that one. I think that's... Sure. That's being pedantic. So it's asking for meaning, and I type sudo, obviously. So that stuff is pretty egregious, I think. Having a one tap reducing, I think that's equivocating like that's preventing from feeling two steps, two steps forward, one step back. This is more like one step forward, one step back. And I think that's not a great way of incentivizing taking chances and increasing your flow. So then you get into that whole grindy situation where like, oh yeah, now I'm tiptoeing on glass, right? Glass shards. It's a balance. I imagine there are scripts out there that will balance that out. So this is my commentary on what's the default, not necessarily what you can change. I'll probably end up adapting as I go. How quickly I will type things and whatnot. Oh, there, Gecko. I'm doing all right. We're doing today's our review day, so doing that. How are you? It's a bit late. How have you been? Hmm. Oops. Pretty good. Amazing long. I imagine. At that rest. Anything interesting that you find topical? I've been typing quite a lot and reading quite a lot. There's quite a lot of topical things that are relevant to language learning and being on the internet and stuff. So lately, lots and lots of stuff to preoccupy my background. I have a lot of stories in my back pocket. Perhaps another day, right? with some time. Maybe on the weekends. Maybe, weekend conversation. You try to keep up with my reviews either live or with the replays. I'm thinking when you level up, I move on a level on WaniKani Wani to keep up the work on your side. Ooh, I like that. Blair gave me the impression she is also doing it because the last time I checked in with Blair, she was on level 3. And since we done level 3, I'm holding her to it, you know. It's awesome to be. That's a really interesting, man. That is a really interesting way of going about cooperating. Interesting. Yeah, sure. On weekends you can afford to stay up later, or on a day you get a live. Yeah. Yesterday I went a little too late, and today the Discord was really active, or like I had people shared something, so I tend to be very active to type things. And then when I got up today, you know, quite a lot of things that are relevant to me in the background happened overnight, or not overnight, over afternoon. I wake up I keep waking up a lot later in the day, so all the day's activities pass by the time I wake up, right? So like people actually leave their work day by the time I start my day. I don't usually like immediately tackle like emails and look at news and stuff until after my morning routine. So by that time, the evenings like news and stuff has passed. So then depending on how relevant and stuff that stuff is, it can like push me till late. I don't necessarily want it. I'm distracted a lot, which is kind of a good thing and also kind of a like distraction thing, right? Like because I'm not paid or obligated to do this. There's quite a lot of things that transpired on the internet lately. The first time you tried out Kaniwani was very shortly after you started. I mean, Kaniwani, yeah, after starting WaniKani. I think it was a bit too challenging at the time, but the time you had, yeah, that's understandable. Now it feels good to review it, yeah. And in a way, describing is also what it means to live life, right? Yep. It's I don't want to get so I can't think of a very non-biased word, but to me, the word I would describe in times like this is it's very exciting. Maybe anxiously exciting, or maybe cautious optimism, because what's happening on the internet and lots of other things compiled, I have so much thinking to do and so much writing to do. Like recently, I'm not sure if you're familiar with John Green and his brother Hank Green. However, the last thing I posted before I'm like, I can't digress anymore in the Discord because I'm gonna be super late, and then things get to he posted his weekly vlog, right, on Vlog Brothers, and he was talking about is audiobooks considered reading? And this is something I answer quite a lot, like quite a lot, when people say, oh, you should read this, you should read that, and it's very relevant to my perceptions about language learning. It bleeds into all of that. John, so it's a channel called Vlog Brothers. It's let me give you a brief description in case you can make a more like informed decision about whether you enjoy this or if this is useful to you. I tend to plug them a little bit. One day, maybe like 10 years down the line, if I ever cross paths with them, it's probably going to be a form of. There are very few people in my life that I would be a little bit humbled and practically embarrassed if they find out I talk about them in the most brightest sense. So the Green Brothers, they've been doing this way longer than I have, but I've been around. They are generally almost one generationally ahead of me. So like 8 to 10 years, right? So they are my seniors. So these people, the track that they're doing and stuff really represents where my aptitude is and my personality. So these are kind of the most influential people that projects. And so if what I'm saying is very interesting, typically these guys already covered it in a more elegant way, and they are heavily influenced. And they have a channel called Vlog Brothers. And it's very cute because Hank and John take turns writing vlogs to each other. So they record something that's less than 10 minutes. And it's a thought and stuff. I think Hank does it on Tuesday. Someone does it on Tuesday and someone does it on Thursday. So it's kind of like a pen pal between two brothers. However, they do it in a format that is public to allow others to vicariously participate, to engage in demonstrating what it's like to have intellectual dialogue between a personal friend or family. And I had considered doing something like that. Unfortunately, my close friends are very busy. So we tried a few times, largely due to the nature that if you demonstrate communication between two people and family members, it encourages communication. You know, like, oh, you can talk to your family like that. You can talk to your child or discuss with your child, that kind of thing. And Hank and John Green is the author. John Green is the author of Faults in Our Stars. I'm going to use Faults in Our Stars as a way to, it's his most like mainstream thing that may ring a bell. So he's a published author of various things, but one of them would be Faults in Our Stars. His most recent, was talking about his most recent book that he recorded. He often narrates his books. So he recently finished recording his all about like his tuberculosis book. So he in the last, I can't spell tuberculosis, in the last 3 to 4 years of effort, he published something in order to overturn or use his influence in order to affect allowing TB tests to be readily available in countries that are still ravaged by TB, right? Because in the modern world, we don't like in the developed worlds, right? The developed countries, we don't often talk about TB anymore, largely due to the advancements. And yet, we feel that this is disproportionately represented by TB's presence in developing countries. So it's a long narration. You can probably follow it if you're interested, right? But it's talking about his book. So he recently narrated it and getting ready for audiobooks. So his thought involves that. They've been doing this for well over 10 years. Most of their work deals with creating information. So Hank Green, for example, is the entrepreneur side of high functioning things. He did things like SciShow and Crash Course, or something that deals with education. So most of these, they raise money enough to sustain their livelihood. However, almost 90% of their influence and the things they do are to improve the quality of information, education, and well-being, right? So it kind of sounds very, very redundant with what I say all the time now. And it's a coincidence. I actually didn't know these guys for this long. I knew them maybe by chance, like approximately 2 years ago. And I don't religiously watch their stuff. And I like that they moderated their Vlog Brothers to Tuesdays and Thursdays. So it's not like a creating an unintentional dependency, right? And it's really reflective of the personalities that they have. Generally, creating dependency is something that either it's consciously avoided or it's moderated because Hank and John are not individuals who solely focus on very compulsive. They actually try to do the opposite. John actually struggles openly, struggles or deals or cope with compulsion, right? So it's one of those things, like their personalities kind of overlap with the material. Would their latest video on audiobooks be a decent representative of their content? Yes, usually it's very consistent. So John on Vlogbloggers, it's commentary and it's less than 10 minutes. They are far more succinct and concise and eloquent than I am, largely due to the nature, I would say, that the community that they have are long-standing community members. So when they talk about things, I think they have a leniency in order to be very harsh and generalize a little bit, large due to many years of iterations. So when someone like a new person goes in and they ask a question, they have a relatively robust, incredibly large community that's able to adjust and welcome that person, which takes the onus a little bit off of individuals who may take things out of context or overly generalize, right? So if you listen to their commentary, it's probably going to be very reminiscent. I mean, I would love to ask them directly, if not. However, the approach that they talk about typically resonates with me, like how they make commentary and evaluate situations. Hank is on the lively side. John is on the side that is more my personality, where I often think manically about things and compulsion. However, both of them execute with the concern for providing commentary and approaching constructively. So the vlogs are, in the words of John, I think it was John who talked about consuming. Oh, actually, both John and Hank did something like this, where they talk about what makes social media and the information incredibly robust and interesting. One is to provide some sort of personality or life anecdotes while making it relatable, while at the same time being critical about something and profoundly constructive, right? There's 2 or 3 major elements that exist in a form of media that creates that magic. I think I'm more likely thinking it was a John video that I'm referring to. So they both post on the same video, and it's fun watching them interact, because I do earnestly believe in the future that's how they interact. And so I won't tell you, like, share with you what his opinions are. I will share my anecdote and you can compare with his. How is this relevant to language learning? Well, oftentimes the impression I've gotten in the last year, it's almost been a year now of language learning, and obviously well above the average person's learning frequency. I get the impression oftentimes it's a competition, right? Like it's a competition, speaking and listening versus writing and reading, right? But it's a mismatched dissonance. Hear me out here, where reading is the preferred way of input, but speaking is the bias output. And writing is not associated with reading as a necessity, or like as a different dimension, and listening is second to reading, right? So where reading would listening would be akin to speaking. So there's this really hodgepodge, like you have, A, B, C, D, but oftentimes
A is associated with D originally, but due to the nature of the internet, it's associated this way in terms of importance. And rarely do these things get associated anymore, right? I like writing because I like reading. Not that it's exclusive. We're suggesting an underrepresented perspective. I like reading, and by writing I appreciate reading. I like speaking because I appreciate listening, right? However, in the language learning space, it's often that reading is the step used to get to speaking. So there's a leap of logic, there's a leap where, oh, if I do enough reading, I eventually learn how to speak. And then, there's pushbacks. People say, oh, no, but you have to listen to natural speakers in order to speak. But it's interesting that is advice. What I mean is how cause and effect and association between the act and the input and the output is passed on as wisdom, as like something that is best kept secret, or something to language learning and other things. And that really demonstrates how hyper focused a mindset can be when considering how you interact with information and learn information. Now, how is this relevant to John Green? I'll talk about a little bit. The main question that prompted his vlog is, does listening to a book or reading a book constitute as reading? Right? We talk about semantics and categorizations a lot of times. And for myself, over the years, like the many years, when someone say manga, anime, right? Manga, anime is relatively a synonymous parallel example. Manga involves reading, anime involves seeing and listening, right? But seeing in a different context, seeing in the listening of something, right? And oftentimes when someone likes manga, they're rarely concerned about the sound of anime. It's interesting. Like, what I mean is, okay, they might like the Japanese language and whatnot, but the process of how sound impacts their experience. Cue the person who likes reading books instead of watching the movie version of their favorite books. I listened to John Green's books. I haven't actually read John Green's books. So the Anthropocene Review is easily one of my favorites, commentary and stuff. The Anthropocene Reviewed. That was my first introduction to John Green. He narrated himself. I listened to it, and then so I didn't read it. However, some people will ask, well, have you read a book recently? And I'm like, well, yes, technically I have. I know most of the contents in Anthropocene Reviewed, but I haven't actually literally used my eyes to read it. I have a predominant combination of reading something and listening to things when it suits me. So recently, I listened to Fault in Our Stars on road trips. I listen to audiobooks while I'm driving, like long road trips. So I recently completed Faults in Our Star and Turtles All the Way Down, which both were adapted into movies with John Green's collaboration. So those two were very different experiences. They are neither better or worse than each other. They are exclusively in a manner that is different enough that warrants experiences, much like using WaniKani and suddenly using Kani Wani for a different motivated reason, right? And long story short, I don't think when someone asks me, do I read a book, I generalize like, did I consume the information? It's like, yes. And some people might say, well, you didn't read the book, so you didn't use your imagination. It's like, yes, but you also didn't listen to the book and hear the inflection and personality of John Green's voice reading his own book, right? So most of the time people like to differentiate better and worse, not solely, not based on the larger perspective. They base it on the cherry-picked characteristic of their preference and compare it to the absence of that, or the absence or the presence of that particular metric. Like, for example, books. Well, you can't use your imagination because someone has created those images and sounds for you, for example. So a person would say, I prefer to read a book because it allows me to use my own imagination and creativity as opposed to watching a movie, which has depictions. Well, you can still be creative and imagine things based on the stimuli of the movie and the sound. One can iterate and create new emergent properties off that. The refusal to think it's important is, in my opinion, the perspective that underlies his recent, in my opinion, an extension of his recent commentary on is it considered reading? Well, the answer is both, right? Books, reading. If the purpose is to obtain information, right? And he had a really, and one last thing before you go, probably, John Green had this really wonderful vlog, like way back when he was talking about the limitations. He was brainstorming and talking about the limitations of language and categorizations in general, where language will, by its design, attempt to capture expressive like communication between people, right? But ultimately will fail largely because it captures a portion of it, right? That does not mean one should stop attempting to evolve their form of expression, because music, sound, visuals, that can aid in it too. And when him as a published author have some interesting ways and elegant anecdotes involving like how one describes the limitation of written language, right? And I find this most recent one to be very, very, I got lost in thought, largely because I'm learning a language, which John Green actually hasn't ever disclosed if they know different languages. It would be so interesting to hear like how someone, like, to see what his approach would be in his commentary on a different language. He does collaborate though with a lot of people who do possibly like translate his work and whatnot. I'm sure he has experience with that. Some of his books are international, so it'll be interesting to know. I love it. This was very a strong point because it relates so much to language learning. That consideration that certain things are more important than other things, yet they are all part of the same process, or they are cumulatively part of the same process. And it resonated with me with lots of things that John Green himself might not participate in, although his words through his experience were phrased in a manner that encapsulates the idea that all the above. And I really like that. Let's see. You initially got into Japanese mainly because you wanted to understand anime and the subtitles and the dialogue that get lost in translation. To achieve this goal, I briefly considered learning only phonetically, okay? But I very quickly dropped that idea because it felt like a shortcut that would make me miss so much. And I don't know how much easier it would really have been anyway. Tough. Yeah. Tough to gauge. I'm still a long way from watching anime without subs, but I'm enjoying the process, so I don't mind. Some friends and families do have some trouble understanding that though. Yeah. I think the biggest resistance, I'm gonna stick with my guns most of the time. I read things multiple times in multiple contexts. So when someone asks me, do I watch anime without subtitles? The answer is no. And then if someone asks me, do I watch anime with subtitles? I say yes. And then they stop there. You see what I mean by how short-sighted that is? So if someone asks you a yes or no question, right, I would pause, but technically, yes. If I were being concise, I would test the person's understanding of nuance, right, when it comes to engaging in question asking. Oftentimes, questions are incredibly narrow, but it does reveal their biases. Like if someone asks me, "Oh, do you use subtitles with anime?" And I'm like, "Yes." What do you suggest that person would say? They wouldn't ask me what kind of subtitles. A lot of times it doesn't. It stops. The thinking stops because it's not inclusive. It's largely seeking a confirmation bias. So if someone asks me their whole host of questions like, do you use subtitles to watch anime? I will say yes. So what kind of subtitles and instead of asking an open-ended question, they might go and say, oh, so you use English subtitles? Like, well, yes. They didn't ask me if I use Japanese subtitles because I would still say yes. And then when someone says, oh, do you listen to the English dub of anime? Yes. It's like, oh, so... And then it stops there because they don't ask me, do I listen to anime in Japanese? I would still say yes. The idea is there is confirmation bias, and then there's confirmation bias based on narrow-sightedness. It's different when someone's being inclusive and relying on confirmation bias, and then it's very different, which is why I resonate with Hank Green and John Green and intellectuals like that, is when they leave open-ended questions. So leave for the consideration that it can be both, all of the above, none of the above, or even things you don't understand or know yet. And one of those types of approaches lead to a behavioral idiosyncrasy when it comes to communication. And it's very felt most of the time. Like, oftentimes people resonate and vibe check. Well, oftentimes you don't find a lot of examples on the internet like Hank and John that they actually manage to cultivate a community of individuals, or like a community that's bolstered by that type of openness, that inclusiveness in thinking, largely because it's very laborious if you're used to the fast-paced algorithm of confirmation bias, right? When you say, oh, I think language learning is best learned phonetically by listening to lots of native content. You type that in. The moment you type that into your search engine with an enabled history, you're going to be reinforced in the ups and downs of just that topic. No other topic will get reinforced as hard. So based on the phrasing of your search result, you can write, is listening to native content the best way, right? Or you can say the best way of learn Japanese fluency. The moment you type very specific point of views, the algorithm is going to reinforce that. Like every automated thing will get you to what you want. It will confirm all your suspicions, right? And it's on the person, the user, to have enough critical thinking skills and problem solving skills in order to challenge the algorithm. So what does that look like? It doesn't get to the second stage most of the time. I would say over 50% of the time people stop there. And actually, if you reduce it by age, in age group, get to like 20s and stuff, it stops, almost exclusively stops there. I would say 9 out of 10 people stop after they confirm their suspicions. No null hypothesis testing, no consideration that it can be both. Both could be true at the same time. Both could be wrong or slightly inaccurate at the same time. So I watch English things with English subtitles. And if they offer Japanese, I would watch people speaking in English with Japanese subtitles, but that's not an option because it's diminished return. Like, now let's think about the intersection of business, like video games, language learning apps. What is the return on investment? So, like, I love Like a Dragon games because, in my opinion, it's still a very brave move to triple dub your games with the potential backlash and or like, oh, this is where my money is going if I buy this game. I wish they didn't spend so much money dubbing, triple dubbing. That those are the things that are related to the mindset of being interacting with content. Nowadays, content is hyper efficient. And this is related to also the recent things going on with like TikTok, AI, and whatnot. But the hyper efficient way of doing things also stifles creativity, inclusiveness, and open mind thinking. So the more efficient you get without moderating it with other ideas can produce in subconscious, even a subconscious pattern and emotional response to whenever something is inconvenient, something that does not align with your expectations. And that bleeds into how business is done now, how people are incentivized to design products that only confirms your suspicions, and then they rely on techniques that confirms your insecurities, right? It's confirm, confirm, confirm. So nowadays, I would say older intellectuals, when I have conversation with them, it's often about the commentary on how intellectual creativity and stuff has been stifled. Like, not in those exact words, but often the discussion is how things become so iterative now. Like and it's not bad or good. It feels nice, as in ultimately feels nice. That's what they get reinforced. Like, if we have one MCU movie, let's have 40 of them until the point it doesn't work, right? Until it's oversaturated. But when does that point end? Well, Fortnite didn't end. Roblox didn't end. So the idea is you can iterate just enough, but usually it stifles creativity. And that's all well and good when you're happy, but the moment when you're unhappy, what do? Well, you clearly have withdrawal symptoms and then raise a riot and feel like your life has ended. And that was demonstrated very real because of the TikTok thing. So it kind of is alarming. It's kind of scary. It's all sorts of feelings right now. The consequence of efficiency and hyper-objectivity and high convenience has taken an unexpected turn of dependency. So when someone says, well, this tool doesn't do this, and say, well, you can do it yourself, like for fun, maybe as an exercise, like, no. I need to get something. The tool has to do this. It's something I need. I'm like, I don't think they need to teach you grammar. You can choose to learn grammar manually. Like, and that's not to excuse like products that suggest certain things and they don't provide those things, right? I think grammar is a big one. Native verbal samples is another one. When a product says, oh, we generate our voices for these practical reasons, your first criticism is they don't have native speech. I'm like, okay, that is not constructive. That's an emotional response to wanting a product to have something that they don't advertise. That's a logical fallacy. It's objectivity being hidden behind subjective emotional responses. That's one of the biggest criticisms for so many language learning apps, and I don't see anywhere that advertise that they have these things. So there's a fine line between expecting something because you feel that it's the best and important versus this is what we have and what we did. Tell me if it's effective. right? You could say it's not effective because they don't have these things, but not that the product is bad because they don't have something that was designed to not have it in the first place. There's no out of box thinking at all. Confirmation bias is 100 times the law. So if something is not there, then it's not in consideration. There are reasons why things are not there as well, right? To be fair, you also watch movies and shows in English or French with subs on in the same language. Yeah, exactly, Gecko. Sorry, I forgot to read that. I should have read that first before I said that. When I achieve sufficient proficiency to be defined, I will watch anime in Japanese with Japanese subtitles. I actually do all of the above regardless of my comprehension level. Gecko, like I watch something in English, and because I know the context in English, I will grab subtextual things in Japanese. I actually watch things that I don't completely comprehend, like in general, even in English. Like there are things that I don't understand, like playing a video game that features a form of logical thinking in puzzle solving that I struggle with. So in general, time is what I negotiate, obviously, because if you're stuck on something and not comprehending something, time becomes a factor. However, things I voluntarily choose, I participate in things that I have no grasp of, right? Because it's not dependent on my life death situation or like some obligate like nutrients or something. Like I'm not going to take, I'm not going to cook mushrooms if I don't understand if it's poisonous or not, that kind of thing. Those are obligations. But voluntarily, I even throw myself at the deep end where it might not be successful. These are mandatory, in my opinion. I would say they're sufficient stimuli to challenge oneself to handle. How do you negotiate failure? How do you negotiate and bring something from failure to not? Yes, there are efficient ways to do things, right? And efficiency is something you choose. So you can do the most of the things you want with efficiency and objectivity in mind. However, like I like to remind someone, like if you do not fail ever, you do not do inefficient things ever, then one reasonably or logically should accept that they are not great at optimizing or being creative of changing things to be sufficient. So when someone says, oh, I know exactly what you need, here's your problem, and I'm going to solve your problem, it's a regurgitation of one's own anecdotal experience coming from someone who is probably likely someone who hasn't failed that process. Like, you don't know. You don't know what their pattern is. It can very well be someone who did fail in the same way, and this was their solution. However, then you still have to take a grain of salt because that failure might be in a different nature due to their background, right? So all of these things are considering things that you may or may not see or witness, and it goes beyond the scope of the person providing that. So when I say I struggle with this thing, I cannot automatically assume that you would struggle with this even if it looks the same, right? However, I can demonstrate these things and allow that other person in good faith, right? I naively, for a very long time, assume that if I can demonstrate a problem-solving skill, that when someone observes that problem-solving skill, they are able to iterate and adapt it to themselves. This is not the social norm anymore, in my opinion. I would say over 50% of the time, this is not the social norm. You have to adequately demonstrate in context and credibility that that person has to literally observe in order to meet their expectations. That's kind of one of those things that you no longer meet in the middle ground. Like, hey, this tool is not quite ideal for my purpose. However, the stuff that works great. The stuff that don't, I have an idea to tweak it. Right? Because I know that the developer does not plan on doing this. That's different from saying this product sucks because I expected this and I full well know the developer isn't going to do this or have no plans on doing this. So instead of rectifying and considering all the counter arguments, this person goes on to spend most of the time confirming their expectations and critiquing and passing off quote unquote objective review and commentary as something that doesn't take consideration of a bigger picture. And that bigger picture used to be at minimum including the person you're criticizing, the people who are working on the product, right? And what they have said and produced and your opinion. It doesn't even reach there anymore. Now, because of unconscionable and unintentional consequences of algorithm, you are the main character and your entire viewpoint is the only valid viewpoint in order to advise people. I think how oxymoronic is it that someone says they're helping you when they rely on information only from themselves? Like, I stop there. Like, it gets immediately stopped in its tracks when someone says, "Oh, I know exactly what your problem is. Here's the solution." Like, can you pause for a moment? Can you describe what my problem is? Because you haven't even done that. Like, do you know what the problem is? Right? And then, someone will say, "Oh, well, I saw that you made this error." It's like, that's not describing what the problem is. You're describing what you observe as a consequence of anything that contributes to that problem. Like, you have not even thought about the exponential, unfathomable combination of things that contribute to that problem. Not that it's insulting or not kind. Trying to help someone is kind regardless of its intent or its source, right? Like, it's helping someone. But the nature of that helping requires some introspection and some compassion. Largely due to the nature that if you're the person being helped, you have to determine if that person's advice is helpful. Which ultimately, when someone projects whatever their experience is and definitely show an error of presumptions, you want to take a step back and consider the idea that this person has not weighed any consideration for you, right? Even though they can be helpful, right? The way internet interacts now is that correct information is correct information. But that correct information has no stipulations, no conditions that are made apparent or transparent. So when someone says, "Oh yeah, you should always listen to native content," that will get you to Japanese fluency. Meanwhile, some people go and ham deep into native content and realize that they gave up after a year or even a month. It's unfortunate, but you would think then that those people use that as a learning lesson, but the internet not only reinforces that, like, I'll say, so you go on and you type, "Yeah, listening to native content doesn't work, like only to native content," and then the internet will reinforce your suspicions, and it does the opposite, where it convinces you of something that is part of the picture. Right? It's constantly part of the picture. Part of the picture that emotionally resonates with you. It's rarely objective. It's true. Like, the stuff that's said is true because someone said it, so therefore someone believes it. It's not objective because it's not inclusive. Right? Like, you don't see the counter arguments, you don't see, and what's funny is you would think articles that talk about this include counter arguments, but that doesn't get views. So when you look at reviews, they don't no longer include counter arguments. you're not reading scientific literature. That's one of the few bastions left where the strength of the article is expected by the strength in which they also answer and address counter arguments. Journalism and algorithm-based things are incentivized to be persuasive. When they're persuasive, they get more views. So if you have an article that's too long where half of it is supporting the good things and half of it is supporting the bad things, then no one's going to sit around for that. They want confirmation bias. Like, give me the TLDR that confirms the overall message, which then will make the person feel like it's overall a excellent decision, when meanwhile one of the counter arguments could derail and be a deal breaker. It sucks. And that's efficiency, though. That's one of the trade-offs of efficiency. You wanted efficiency, you lose all the nuances. And then when you lose all the nuances, you're not incentivized to use those nuances. So if that sells really well, the algorithm will support it. So now journalism has become an op-ed on persuasive pieces. They are no longer op-eds and inclusive like scientific articles, right? Scientific articles are only bolstered and be able to publish because peer review exists. Like, you have to at minimally be able to satisfy your greatest critics in order for that publication to happen. And even then, that is subjected to biases too, right? Like, we're talking about a gold standard that is barely kept and reflective of 90% of online journalism. It's not representative, reflective of 90% of journalism now, or information. And yet that is also subjective to bias because, a decade ago, there was this whole thing about cancer research, right? And even then, with all those fail-safes, now that provides me with a context. Yes, it can sound a little bit cynical, but I'm actually an optimist. I think that model is possible to moderate what's going on right now with misinformation. It's very topical, like the explosion of misinformation with the recent events in the last week. In itself is not necessarily a bad thing to spark reflection and reinforce language, but it does distract me from the content you're trying to watch and enjoy. It does, yeah. So hear me out. I'm talking about making room for someone to engage in a mix situation, right? We're talking about exposure therapy in a way. It's shocking that I'm saying this. I didn't expect myself to be saying this in this context, but intellectual exposure therapy is a thing, in my opinion, now. Like, for example, having accountability for exposing people to the alternatives or the opposites. The problem I can see that large platforms have to negotiate is, how do you transition softly into that without hitting withdrawal symptoms? What are those withdrawal symptoms that look like? You distracted me from my dopamine flow. Like, dude, I ain't got time to watch a random clip that challenges all the clips that I like to watch, right? The question is it to the point where it's too late for businesses to do this at the cost of investing forward in human moderation? Like, what I mean is, how far deep has this idiosyncrasy have become to the point where when you remove something temporarily, the withdrawal symptoms, intellectual withdrawal symptoms, is experienced quite literally in a day's time. That's how, in my opinion, so real lately it has become. Where, like, what happens? I'm thinking like language learning now. What happens if WaniKani went down for 1 month? That sounds like, oh, okay, that's no big deal because there are other things. But what happens if Anki goes down for 1 month? And then you might be thinking, well, Anki's offline and stuff. Okay, well, let's pick something that's only online. You know, what happens when YouTube goes down for a month? Because we felt that recently. And it sounds like a moot point to me. It's like, well, MAKU, why are you getting all upset about it? It doesn't relate to you. Like you don't use TikTok and stuff. Like, well, I don't. But because I'm someone who thinks, in my opinion, larger ramifications, my thought is this sets a precedence for something, right? It doesn't have to be TikTok. Meanwhile, like WaniKani, it doesn't have to be Japanese, right? So, yikes. Like, this is very, very real right now. And I think if there's any way to create like a moderation or like a pullback or a mix thing, it's a crisis. Like you're hit with a crisis, right? And eventually and this morning I woke up to so many like refreshing, although like cautiously optimistic and anxiety inducing proposals on how to resolve dependency, especially dependency on tools that does not offer or naturally are incentivized to offer alternatives. Like as a business, when you're offering a product, the last thing you want to do is advertise a competing product or a differing product that goes against your product in your product, right? It's not like the consumers are thanking you. It's like, oh, thanks for suggesting other things that I may or may not want because they're ads. Think about ads for a moment, right? Those ads are often targeted, right? But they're targeted based on your interest. They're not targeted based on offering alternative enlightenment or stimulation. They are ultimately a distraction. So now we have this hyper efficient world where anything, even a single step, is a constant distraction from the tasks you are focused on. I think it's fairly ironic when someone says, oh, they have short attention spans, they have ADHD because they're doing this task. And when I see this task, I'm like, so you think not being able to do 500 reviews in WaniKani suggests that you have ADHD? My first thought was, before the internet, the expectation of doing a singular task for that long and redundantly is very, very small. Like, much, much shorter. Now, I know there's a distinction. The nuance is that they're talking about a sustained task in terms of their thought process. But think about the requirements they're thinking about, right? When they learn Japanese, they're expecting that they spend a very different perspective of amount of time on something. So now I start to wonder, what is it that makes people think they even have short attention spans? Like, here I am doing this review, right? I consider this as something that actually very few people did before the internet. Like, spending most of their time looking at flashcards. In my opinion, the vast majority of scholars would engage in the content in multiple ways. However, not any single one of them are the best way of learning something. It's the combination of all those things. A various individualized combination of all those things lead to success, right? It leads to consistency. It starves monotony. It doesn't create dependency on one method, right? So Charns linked me this thing, which I was aware of, where now you can take an information like your essay or your homework, and you can use Sora and or like Reina and the different AIs to generate a YouTube short and or a TikTok short where you have like something playing in the background as a visual thing, and there's like letters coming out like a short. It looks like a short, but it's giving you information about something else. My only thought was, that's neat. It's a very efficient way to leverage like the YouTube short thing, make it feel familiar, emotionally comforting, while also feeding information to them. However, that reinforces the dependency that they can only learn in that manner. Not only that, it stifles creativity, so they will be unable to learn in any other way, largely due to the high dependency of that way. So when someone says, oh, I learned a lot from TikTok, it's like, okay, my first question is, where else do you learn things? And nowadays, I would not be surprised when someone admits honestly, it's like, well, you know, I spend most of my time on TikTok, so that's where I learn most of the things. It's like, okay, well, have you learned it in a different format? Right? So how does this relate to WaniKani and language learning? If someone tells me that Anki is better than what I'm doing, I have to ask them, what else did you do? Did you try anything else? Because your advice or your projected advice onto me is dependent on how dynamic you are, right? If you say, oh, I live and die by graded readers, I can't take your advice. Like, it's very, very unlikely that your advice is relevant to me, largely because you do not engage in more than one thing, right? I either love graded readers and agree with you, or I don't, right? When someone says I only watch anime in Japanese, I can no longer talk to you about what English means to me, right? You no longer know how to appreciate the value of dubbing in anime in English because you don't concern yourself with that. And then when you watch it on the internet and you start talking about the internet, they will consistently give you that feedback that anime is the best in Japanese. When does it become a placebo effect and a nocebo effect for the counter, right? Is Japanese anime always good and best in Japanese? Does that person ever consider that anymore? That's the nature of why I have even though I streamed for a very long time, talked to many, many people, there are only a few people that ultimately I do not run out of discussion topics speaking, because they don't end up settling on one idea and have the idea be understood, right? It's one of the things I feel like my best friends and I practice. We actually take time apart, not like intentionally, but by coincidence, largely because we're intellectually spurious people. So if we stay too much time sharing same emotional barriers and experiences, intellectually, it's not interesting anymore, right? It's great to feel connected to someone without explaining or speaking. That is something that is obligatory, to be connected with someone in a fundamental level. However, we don't talk a lot. If we're together all the time, we're not talking about like significant others and whatnot. There's are different negotiations because there are emotional impacts that create dynamics. But when it comes to like friends and intellectual people, yeah, it takes like 5 seconds to catch up, right? Because if you spend a lot of time with each other with the same interests, there are no exposure to other interests, right? Groupthink. You certainly wouldn't use the word best, but I myself do tend to prefer original versions for shows, anime, simply because by nature is what is closest to the original creator's vision. Dub can be great in that own way. So hear me out. You use the word original in the sense that it's implying that the original is naturally the best already, even though you don't use the word best. And you did say prefer, but the idea is the original version of the show is the original version by the Japanese creator. The dub of the show is another original creation based on an interpretation of the dub, right? As opposed to comparing apples and oranges, the obstacles of dubs is different from the obstacle of an original creator. The original creator could create an original dub and an original, like, first language, and those would be both original products of the original creator. However, in the way you phrased it, obviously it does demonstrate your preference, that the originator could be one and the same person, yet one is subpar and one isn't, as opposed to looking at it as a limitation of the original creator. Like, for example, the original creator may have oversight in the dub, or they may be disinterested in the dub, and it's reflected in the product. And they're both originating from the original creator's vision. Right? If original creators say, oh, I would want to dub my anime, I give the green light, and then they just send it off to someone else to do it, then those people become the originators because the original creator doesn't care about it. That is a reflection of the original creator's limitations and care of what is their vision. Their vision is that English is not important to them. Like, you can view it in that way. It's still it originates from the creator. So why do I feel like that's a interesting topic? I'm not saying that this is the case. I can't predict the future and I don't interview to creators, but there are creators, there are great examples like Cowboy Bebop, or people who make games like a Dragon, that have to consider the idea that their game will be in English and in Japanese. And that product is substantially different from a product with an original creator who doesn't care about their dub of their product. Right? So by nature, it is still in the creator's vision. The creator's vision does not include English or whatever the dub language is. And that is an extension and also a reflection of the original creator. Now, I would be a little bit more fair, I suppose, and say the dub is a reflection of whoever they give the permission to do that. And oftentimes, that's how people view it. Maybe put it this way, to me, watching dub feels like listening to a cover song. Exactly. You don't have to explain that. I already know. Like, nothing wrong with that, of course. Okay, and then you can sometimes prefer the cover song. My personal taste simply tends to favor originals. Yes, hear me out here. I'm not talking about what your opinions are. Like, I know what your opinions are. I know what you're trying to say. Like, that makes sense. All that makes sense. But you only have associated negative words with cover and positive words for your personal taste. That's perfectly fine. It's reasonable and it checks out, right? You mean, like, for example, it shows to me that you have to overcome an obstacle to appreciate cover songs, and you typically don't have to overcome obstacles when you're thinking about originals. And yet, a lot of times, if it's not disclosed which one is originals, people might like the cover song over the original without that prior knowledge. So if an anime comes out and the original creator wasn't presented, you may not even know that preference. So since when is it a placebo and a nocebo effect? I don't think people do that. It would be kind of weird. There's no business model around this because that's kind of weird. So there is selective bias regardless if it's better or not, right? And I like that you use personal taste, so that's great, right? Your personal taste might be a placebo effect, and that is perfectly reasonable. How one tells this to another person is very different, right? Like, when you say, when not you specifically, Gecko, but the hypothetical person, say that this is better than this, my first thought is, are you aware of your biases yet? So that I can contextualize how important this is. One way I do it by default is I basically believe whatever they say and I do it myself, right? Without the expectation that I prefer something or not prefer something. So, for example, when someone gives you advice and you're like, oh, but I know my preferences, how much of that prevents you from understanding that other person's perspective, right? Your willingness is dependent on how much of an emotional barrier that is. Like, I'm actually, when someone says, and it's a double-edged thing. When someone says, "Oh yeah, this anime's dub is horrendous. It's so bad. If you're gonna watch this, which is one of my favorite shows, watch it in sub." I'm more likely to test the null hypotheses of this person. I'm going to watch the dub first, then watch the sub, right, or the original language, right? But that also introduces a personal bias. I have to disclose that, oh hey, I was very skeptical because you were very hyperbolic about the dub being terrible. So I watched the dub first. Right? And then that other person's like, why would you do that? It will make the sub terrible now because you have a bad first impression. And I'm like, yeah, that is one way to look at it. However, I'm more interested in why you think the dub is terrible and why you think the sub is very good. So I have to challenge it in order to know get closer to what you're thinking, right? You could take the opposite and say, oh, I should watch the sub first because this person only watched the sub, maybe dabbled in the dub, depending on the context. Usually, when a comment made due to personal taste is largely due to projection. Basically, they watched a little bit of it for the things they don't want because it's an emotional barrier. And then the thing that they do want, they've experienced it in its entirety. So the likelihood of that person watching through the same thing against their personal taste and with their personal taste, the likelihood is that person's advice is based on their personal taste, not the opposite. That takes a lot of time, right? So understanding your own personal taste saves a lot of time. It's an incredibly pragmatic way of looking at things. And yet, when it comes to the cover song analogy, there are substantial generational gaps that illustrates foreknowledge, right? Because order matters. So when someone says they like the original could be the cover song. You wouldn't know. Not in the world of internet technology and convenience. The components that make something original is exposure. So even, and you might be saying, well, what happens when someone finds out that their original is actually indeed a cover song? Well, there's this bias where like, oh, now that I know it's a cover song, it hits differently now. So that is my challenge to the whole personal taste for favorite originals, because I'm not an originator for my ideas. So for example, the stuff that I just shared now about Vlogbrothers, John Green, and Hank Green, I'm not the originator. I don't own these ideas, for example. So to think about talking to someone who has a preference for originals, which we can negotiate, obviously, Gecko, you and I have discussed quite a lot. One thing that does factor in is the idea that how does this affect when I share something? So it would affect the way I share information, knowing more and more about a person's personal taste, which is very useful, right? I would be more inclined than now to expose you to, based on my personal bias, things that might not be original to see what happens, right? Like, for example, would you read Do Androids Dream of Electronic Sheep or watch Ghost in the Shell? You might be thinking, oh, well, that's not like the literal original because it's not like a remake or a cover of it. It's like, okay, then that's still fine, right? However, some people, it can bleed into other things. Like, oh, hey, I love this dish. This dish is fantastic. It's like, well, that's fake because this is the original dish. I'm like, well, do you enjoy this dish or not? Like, it's not my dish. But I'm the originator of suggesting that idea to you. So is it cheapened by the fact that there is an originator for it? And for me, not for older people, not like for older people, younger people, you are sidelined habitually based on whoever they associate with first, as opposed to the creative chronology of things. So, for example, this generation, what are the best Star Wars movies? We'll bring back like what you mentioned before about Star Wars. Which ones are the best Star Wars films? The most recent ones. Generationally. Like the statistically, it's the most recent ones. I, on the other hand, actually prefer the originals, but I watched them after I watched the prequels. So I watched the like 1, 2, and 3, and then watched 4, 5, and 6. Then I watched because the order was that I started watching Star Wars when the prequels came out. And then by happenstance, I know that there are 4, 5, and 6, so I watched them. And then after that, the sequels came out. So even in that preference, there's originality involved, right? Yes, it's all Star Wars. However, because of personal preference, I can't tell if it's a preference for originality or is it a preference for other things. And I entered this conversation a lot about movies and songs because I enjoy listening to other people's iteration of songs and stuff for what they are, not for because their relationship with the originators. That's part of the equation for sure. I would usually not recommend one way or another on that topic, mostly because I don't watch it both ways in parallel, so I can't really compare them. People tend to have their own default anyways. Cliche terminating discussion, but yes, I would say people tend to have their own default anyways. Like there's no way I can disagree with that. Like I don't disagree with that. I don't know where to go from there. Like that's like saying all people make mistakes. So that's something, that's another topic that is very common with like internet commentary, where when you end on a all catch-all statement, I have no disagreements with that. People tend to have their own default anyways. Yes. What type of defaults? I was talking about what the different types of defaults, right? I mean, nothing compels me to push them away from this default. That's fine. I mean, nothing, huh? That's a pretty strong statement. I'm not entirely sure if I gave you the impression that this was something about compelling people from pushing them off their own defaults. This is more of an exercise in self-awareness, not necessarily what's good or bad, which still continues to sound like it's good or bad situation. Like, if nothing compels you to push them off away from their default, that's perfectly fine. But many people on the internet do try that. True. many people on the internet do try that, and I'm not necessarily compelled to do that either. However, I think it's really, I'm curious when individuals that are compelled to do that, right? Like, let's just say someone who wants to do that, does it change when they hear these things? Like, for example, my spiel right now, does it change anything if the environment was a mix, right? Right? The internet is normalizing compelling content, like very, very substantially persuasive, compelling content. And many people, largely, I would probably also qualify that people who spend most of their time on the internet, does it change at all that behavior if they were exposed or like myriadly exposed or become so aware of that one doesn't have to compel or one doesn't need to be consistently compelled to do things. They may do things out of sheer curiosity. And that curiosity isn't behind the intent of compelling someone, right? Like, do I have to convince you that something is interesting by directing something towards you or merely exposing you to it? And then the funny thing here, or something humorous here, is the internet uses mere exposure as a form of like persuasive argument. So if you stack a persuasive piece and then reiterate it as a exposure, it like has an additive effect, almost a synergistic effect. In a matter of one day, misinformation got amplified like so fast that anyone outside the system barely had time to react to it. Like, you can't like, it's so difficult to place moderations and whatnot when how fast amplification happens is so, like, it's crazy. Like, oh, the world's going to end because your favorite app went down. Less than, like, you go to bed and you get up and you already have people who have escalated and amplified this default, I guess, this like call to action to amplify the default. And that's crazy, at least in my opinion. Again, like, if you like originals, right, and you have a preference for originals, that's something I have to consider, right? That's something that's informative to me. Do I like originals, like as a personal share, because you were very kind, Gecko, to sharing your personal takes. Do I prefer originals and covers? Historically, due to recency, I largely end up preferring I largely end up preferring the same thing that the internet is so efficient at doing, which is for every original, I hear many covers, right? And because of the many covers and different iterations on the covers, I enjoy the aspect of building and creating from those covers. So I respect that there's an original and that there's a legacy, but they're one in the same. As in, the originals and the covers are treated as a continuum of the same IP. Not that the cover and the original are two different things. Like in a mindset thing, in a preference thing. Without the original, I can't enjoy the cover. If without the cover, I can't discover the original. So ultimately, yeah, that's kind of a cop-out situation because you're not giving me an ultimatum. Like, if you had to choose one, and I'm like, yeah, that's true. If I had to choose one, it will be based on recency. The most recent thing that I have the most fond memory with is going to be the thing I favor, which is what the internet does well, right? So I'm more likely to favor the cover because there are so many of them. Because the cover group is bigger than the original group in terms of exposure. So I myself have a preference that was a result of mere exposure. So I like WaniKani because more people talk about WaniKani. Right? I'm interested in that because in order to connect with more people, I connect and evaluate the thing that occurs more often. Hence the whole relationship with the internet and confirmation bias. I chose Duolingo because more people talk about Duolingo, whether it's positive or negative. Like lots of people complain about Duolingo, that's exposure. I get a lot of exposure to Duolingo. Duolingo is not the originator of language learning apps. Rosetta existed well beforehand when I was in college. So, do I favor Duolingo? Favor is a positive positive word. I am more exposed to Duolingo, so I am interested in Duolingo's both positive and negative stuff. When I evaluate Duolingo, it's not guaranteed to be positive or negative, largely because it's not my original. It wouldn't be the original experience or the first experience. Oftentimes, your first experience, or aka the original experience, often has a benefit, right? It has a benefit of first impression and creating all your standards, or knowing that you restrict yourself to always viewing the original before the iteration, then that can also favor the order matters thing. Duolingo is certainly my first. It's not going to be my last language learning app. And yet, I am guilty of using the internet for my purpose. So if someone wants me to investigate something that no one uses, like quote unquote, no one uses, or someone's like, oh yeah, this is so underrated, that requires a level of trust that involves, does this reasoning still apply to your sub and dub debate? Yes. Yes, originally Sparks many does, but I would assume you don't watch the same content in many different languages and no real recency bias. I still watch both of them in like, for example, right now I'm watching Vinland Saga in Japanese and English. Season 1. Attack on Titans I watched in both English and Japanese. Whichever one is recent and end up leaving the most tenuous, slight edge to bias. So Attack on Titans, the last thing I watched was in English as opposed to Japanese. So it's probably more recent. And sometimes they're in serial as opposed to parallel. So like I don't watch episode 1 in English, then I watch episode 1 in Japanese. I watch all of it in English and then all of it in Japanese. So it's unfortunately going to have recency bias. The last thing I can think of is like, what does the voice of Eren Yeager sound like? I can only think of the English one right now because it was the last thing I watched. And that is tough, right? So I'm subjected to all these biases. It still applies to everything I've said. I have biases that I'm aware of. Do they affect my overall quality of life and understanding? That's something that I tend to concern myself about, as opposed to whether it's the best way or where my biases are, right? When a challenge happens, then I change my behavior, or I try to challenge the behavioral change. So when someone challenges me and say, well, it would be interesting to know, I would be wary of someone who claims to have no biases. I would too. I would really be wary. In fact, I would ask them first, are they AI generated? And then even then, I would ask the AI generated prompt, are you biased because you're based your data sets on human data sets? If you know what I mean. And hear me out. I still watch some of those people with the understanding that when they say they're trying to be purely objective, they're trying, right? There's a difference between an influencer who I watch seldomly that says, I am being completely objective right now. This is completely objectively and literally true. The moment I hear those phrases is the moment I'm like, I'm going to watch you every so often. Largely because I need to desensitize myself to people who are always being agreeable in the sense of being self-aware, right? So most of the time, the creators and content creators that I watch are people who say, hear me out, I'm trying to be as objective as I can here. And then I'll go into my subjective take on this, right? There's a separation, there's an acknowledgement. My comments are filled with prefaces. I say, hear me out. Think from my perspective. Every time I use the word perspective, it is synonymous with bias because it's a perspective, right? All the things I've said is not a critique of not being biased or have a goal of being not biased. I actually think humanity is incredibly rich and distinguishable from artificial intelligence, like true in the future, maybe true generative artificial intelligence in the future. I think retaining this bias and understanding and exploring people's personal preference and engaging in discussion is what will distinguish and preserve humanity's distinction from an entirely, I don't know, objectively clear-cut thing. That's kind of why I love reading people's comments that are not ChatGPT prompts. I kid you not. Oops. Dang it. Sorry. I was trying to ban this bot and I accidentally clicked on the one link. I hope that didn't do anything. I really dislike these bots. I hope that didn't ruin anything. Yeah. So there's these like Twitch bots that constantly spam links, and then I guess their goal is when they work, they can cause the streamer to click on the link by accident, and I just did that. So that stuff is a different topic for the time being, but hopefully nothing happened. I really hope nothing happened, but we'll see. I'll keep an eye on it. Anyways, yeah, biases aboard, right? Like I actually think it's the most. Oh yes, there's merit in aiming or objectively while acknowledging bias. Pretty scient. I can't believe the American care system is so bad. Fictitious. Listen. We already did that. Sorry, that's that was one of our thought experiments. It was a proof of concept in the Discord. Oh yes, there's merit in aiming for objectivity while acknowledging biases. Pretty scientific approach. Anyway, I should definitely get this up. Yeah, it's a great talk, Gecko. It's a great talk. You know what? Hear me out before you go to bed. Because you shared with me this thing, and then because now you know that I am biased towards a specific thing, the most intellectual responsible thing to do for fun is to challenge each other's notions and conceptions. Very scientific approach. I know. So now that I've shared a lot of opinions about my own biases, and then you shared some of yours, we can intellectually challenge each other to, subvert our own perceptions. And that, to me, is a way to engage in humanity's richness that isn't so scientific. What I mean is like unadulteratedly objective, because I think investigating and solving problems objectively has its merits, but enjoying and learning about each other as human beings requires subjectivity, right? Requires compassion. So if you try to make relationships between strangers and intellectuals as objective as possible, that's legitimately trying to aim at removing the humanity from two people. Like, you have opinions. That's awesome. I like to know your opinions. It's not as awesome and fun when all of us agree on objective facts and build our entire relationship on agreeing on what is objectively true. That's not interesting. There's no discussion in it. Like, if it's truly objective, it's not interesting. Sure thing. For starters, I'll try to watch Vlogbars tomorrow and let you know. Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, Gecko. Good luck, good luck. Sleep well. Sorry for holding you up. And I'll finish the rest of my stuff. Thank you again, Gecko. It's always been a pleasure. Always been a pleasure. Now I just hope I didn't get doxxed by clicking on that viewer bots link. The destination. Okay, let me double check this. The destination is that. Okay. Let me double check because I accidentally clicked on this link. Okay. Minimum, but okay. Maybe not. I think we're fine. That was the first time I accidentally misclicked. It was bound to happen eventually by misclicking the name or the link. So I wanted to make sure I didn't just dox myself. Or let me check my download queues for a sec. Okay, no. Okay, I don't see any executables or any unintentional access or execution of things. Okay, anyways. Please, Twitch. I mean, that would be a 2025 Christmas miracle. Year 2025, the end, and using AI resources or even generative AI resources to target that type of bot spam. Every single day, man. Every single day, there's one. Okie dokie. I can't believe the American healthcare system. Sorry, I'm quoting. I'm not saying that. Disclaimer. We were fictitious is that was an interesting thought experiment. It's a scary thought experiment, fictitious. It took me like less than 5 minutes. You know what I mean? Fictitious. And nowadays, like, I don't even know. It's so. Okay. Some part of me want to take up this challenge in educating, like going back to teaching or something, going to like a high school or university, like applying to do a teaching job and see how that, and like how different it is when it comes to writing. But man, I did. By the way, fictitious, that was the first time I've ever used ChatGPT. I don't know if I disclosed this, but it was on a whim. Like, I actually never visited, like, until yesterday to do that prompt. Like, about, like, how to, what the prompt. I haven't used LLMs yet, like, at all. Like, So I was like, oh, that would be a great experiment for the try. So I typed in ChatGPT on Google. I clicked on it. I clicked in the little box in the middle, and I'm like, what kind of prompt would be a topic that a foreigner would want to, that a person upset with their country would want to impersonate a foreigner in order to show outside mere exposure of something disagreeable, in order to use collaterally someone else's image in order to bolster the credibility of their protests, right? And my thought was, okay, the American health system, I guess. And then immediately after that, it's like, oh, wait, but I can do this prompt and I can do this prompt. And then you suggested a prompt, and it took less than 10 minutes to generate that from scratch. I had no idea how to use ChatGPT. Like, I legitimately thought, oh, hey, here's a box. I didn't read any instructions. I'm like, okay, let's just put something in and see what happens. That is the amount of resistance to do something like that. It's non-existent. It's like, it's so convenient. It's so absurdly convenient. I'm gonna quote some people, my monkey brain, right? The monkey brain side of me would suggest that I can empathize with other monkey brain side of theirs to say, why don't everyone use this? Right? Because the first thing you think about is, dang, you can do a lot of things in a matter of a few minutes. And my thought was, oh boy, it's going to be very different in the future. Like for me personally, not for like other people. I'm sure it's already like this. Like some person's like, dude, you haven't ever used ChatGPT? It like changed my life. Like, why do you waste time writing like prompts and writing your paragraphs and sentences? And my first thought is, well, my friends are human beings, and I like to express my humanity through my writing to human beings, right? If you use a middleman, I hope, right? I hope the other people, your friends and stuff, use the same middleman and then learn a different type of language and a different type of interaction in order to communicate your feelings. Like, for example, when someone wants to write an email to your friends and you want to write an apology email, you use ChatGPT. And then you're assuming the other person at the other end knows how to interpret ChatGPT's version of that person's apology, right? So hear me out here. This would be an interesting thought experiment. Oh man, this would be a great thought experiment. So language could evolve even further and even more nuanced. So say person A wants to make an apology, and then they use a filter. ChatGPT is the filter, right? And then it goes through a personal filter, right? And then to person B. Now, if both person A and B are familiar with ChatGPT, they could form the personal filters in order to interpret what ChatGPT is saying to each other, right? That would be like that would end up being a meta language. And what would be really cool to do this meta language is when someone generates ChatGPT, this would involve full disclosure though. If they generate a ChatGPT thing, it would show something like the prompt words. That could aid in understanding this meta language. Alternatively, people will end up using ChatGPT so much that they develop a friendlek, right? A dialect in between. That would be really, really interesting in the future. Not that I'm I'm apprehensive about this, right? So then everyone will be requiring to learn a filter through ChatGPT in order to communicate to another person, right? What does, I mean, this isn't new, by the way. That's kind of the idea of a universal translator. And what I mean by that is we have to suspend the disbelief that there's such thing as a universal translator, but generally speaking, things are lost in translation, right? However, that's this is like, well, yeah, duh, because in my opinion, everything is lost in translation. What I mean by that is, lost in translation deals with like speech, right? Speech and writing, but people are not telepathic. So even when you have the most exceptional translators and the exceptional reading and writing, feelings are lost in translation, right? So reliance on universe translators and all that stuff removes, like, can potentially remove human interaction in different ways. One would be the interaction of a foreigner with a native speaker. That natural human interaction is lost when you're using a tool, right, to do that. So you don't circumnavigate that anymore. And you might not ever need it. Some people would argue if you have a universal translator, then you don't have to participate in that. Okay, so less humanity interaction. Great. Like, there you go. Or like you don't need SRS. You don't need SRS, so therefore that's less things you can interact with other people. You can talk, you don't have to talk SRS with anyone else. These are human things, right? Human characteristics. So it's going to be curious in the future. I know you, Fictitious, I don't know if you're still listening. I know you brought up ChatGPT and the concern, like, is this real or not? Actually, my colleagues, my best friends, they do like hobby posts and all that stuff, and they're engaging in the same dialogue. Like, there's all this generative AI thing, and it's so tough now. It's like tougher and tougher. It's progressively becoming tougher and tougher to know if using AI is a normalized behavior to communicate, or is it mitigating and minimizing the incentive to communicate anymore, right? Like, someone maybe like a month ago or something showed me what they did, and my first inclination was, that back cynicism in the back of my head is like, why does this sound like this person didn't write this? Like, the way this person talks to me, right? And the work that they have done sound like two different people. Not like, I didn't even need to analyze the ChatGPT. Like, I didn't need to analyze the writing itself for like nuances, because there's already a strong inconsistency between the person that I speak to and the person that it's writing to. And as a concession, I sound very, very different when typing and speaking. However, logic and development of ideas still carry regardless of the diction changes, right? This person went from someone who makes comments like, games always suck, to a well-developed essay on how games have a balance of pros and con analyses when they're typing to me. I'm like, are you trying to like sound like me? Because you don't sound like you now. So you start thinking, racking around your brain, did they go on ChatGPT and say, may sound like a scientist, type in like, make an opinion about video games, and then use the prompt and say, make it sound more like a scientist, or make it sound more like a biologist or a molecular biologist. Make it sound like a American Chinese person talking, explaining video games. And my first thought is, whoa, you don't sound like yourself. Like if we're gonna be like, if I need to get to know you, I don't want to read something that you think I want to hear. I want to hear your opinions, your biases, your stuff, your idiosyncrasies, and it includes language learning. I want to hear your errors, your accents, your like, in fact, it's kind of, maybe I'm a little biased, anti-bias, like being argumentative here. Yes, fluency is great and there's perfection and stuff, but perfection almost seems to me now undesirable because it makes it less and less apparent if it's a human being at the other end. It's a very tiny point. What I mean by that is people who strive for perfection, what do they think that looks like? If it's ChatGPT, then I'm going to have to adjust to that. I think it's been increasingly obvious when someone types like using AI versus someone who types because they like interacting with people. The moment someone gives me something or use something like an AI, an LLM to communicate with me is the moment I feel like that person doesn't like interacting with people. Now, hear me out. It's twofold. This person could have anxiety, social anxiety, and my first comment would be like, hey, are you using a ChatGPT algorithm to type this? I want to let you know it's okay to have social anxiety. I understand. Please use your words. The one solution to social anxiety is to practice and be exposed to that anxiety, but in a comforting, safe space. So if I told you it doesn't matter how, quote unquote, you think your English is, I'm going to try my best to understand you. And through that interaction, language learning occurs, right? It's not an AI compensating for your language learning. It's you wanting to feel good about language learning while interacting with someone. So here I am talking about this because it's a very real thing now. Language learning via AI, right? But it's the interaction of you with the AI. And lots of comments are going to go up. It's like, well, MAKU, you just said natural interactions with people are great because it conditions you to interact with people. And yeah, and I also acknowledge social anxiety as an issue and the availability of people. So both, right? I'm going to do that soon. I'm going to use Chinese to interact with ChatGPT as a way to challenge myself and keep in mind on the awareness that I am not interacting with a human being with its spurious patterns, but an average of human propensities, because LLMs are trained on an average situation, like the entire data set. So this is the averaging effect of the language. So then you would expect when you interact with someone else, logically speaking, a little bit more messier, a little larger range of propensity. And honestly, that's kind of how I rely on detecting personally for my own interest, detect and deduce that I'm talking or reading a product that's by AI when it comes to language, not other things, because my eyes for artwork is not that great. So maybe not. Audio, right? Audio, a lot of people have intuitions for that. It's like, oh, this sounds like AI, but hey, it's getting scarily really excellent. So how are you going to tell beyond that? You got to focus on the human qualities of things. It's kind of weird, I know, to say that. When it comes to language learning, I feel like the way people view improvement has become less and less human over time. Like, it's less and less expecting human things. It's more about being machines. So, yes, I will not have a perfect accent. What is even that? One day, it might be like, well, it's what ChatGPT sounds like when it speaks Japanese, because it's the statistical average of all Japanese speakers that are on the internet, and that's a bigger data set than any individual Japanese person you speak. This sounds outlandish right now, like absolutely outlandish. Big but, if you asked me 10 years ago what was another outlandish idea, that there is a best way to learn language, and that didn't even require AI, any form of AI or training. People now have convinced themselves that it is a statistical way to analyze something that is very principal to human interaction as something that can be measurably, objectively determined. And maybe that's a hot take. Some people come out and say, "Yo, well, there is a best way to do human forms of human expression." I'm like, okay. I mean, I'm probably not going to live to the day where there's a fundamental unifying theory on human expression, like music, artwork, doing things that don't make sense, pragmatically speaking, doing things less efficiently, intentionally, and doing things a different way when no one asked for it. So these are irrational things, irrational things that make humanity incredibly beautiful. And it's lately doom scrolling make me less likely to doom scroll. This is the irony, at least this is one of my ironies, is that I'm less likely to doom scroll largely because it's become incredibly formulaic, right? Algorithm reinforces repetition and replication. They do not emphasize novelty because novelty is discomforting. The moment your doom scroll involves something you don't care about, like an ad, it's the end of the world. It's so emotionally distraught and dissonant the moment something disrupts your flow that even, in my opinion, I feel that too. And all I can think about immediately is, how do I find this interesting? Let's gather something so I can step away, because yesterday I watched, like, instead of sleeping, I spent 30 minutes watching different versions of adults from an older generation using slang from a younger generation, and I saw so much of that. And immediately I thought to myself, okay, well, this is my personal preference, and yet I thought it's only compelling because it's so much of the same thing. And my thought was, okay, this is getting old now, so I must step away. Like, don't get hyperstimulated by comfort, right? There's only so much time for that. Anyways, 2 hours in, let's finish this. I was expecting to liberate some time to do some studying. And there's the story for the day. Maybe I think I might have used up all my stories, so Hanzahiro might get shortchanged. Maybe. Alright. Sorry for clickbaiting. There's a digression in the middle of a WaniKani session all the time. Alright. I'm kind of curious if there's anyone out there. Actually, Gecko is probably the only one at the moment that would deliberately try to find where in the 2 or 3 hour videos where the digression happens. Because there's one. I've been making it a habit to include like one somewhere in these sessions. Not for like necessary for other people to deliberately look for or farm. I'm not making it easily available, obviously. It's for myself, right? This is therapeutic. I like acknowledging my humanity. Life would be very dull and so uneventful if you reject your humanity. And there's a, it's it's an adventure of a lifetime to embrace one's humanity. Adventure of a lifetime. Okay. Oh wait. Okay. Whoops. Oops. Oh no, that's fine. Oh no. That was Prince. That's fine. The moment I hit enter, I was like, whoa! Slow your roll. Feels bad, man. I was thinking of something else. Got distracted by my own thoughts. I promise I'll get better at this, juggling my thoughts and discussions. Maybe even get to a point where I can have the digression while also doing the task. Maybe. Maybe if it's possible. Multitasking is not the most ideal situation. However, I like doing it in general. Hmm. I wouldn't do this when I'm working though. Hey, please, you know, in context, I prefer multitasking when I'm doing things for fun, right? For hobbies and whatnot. However, no, do not like. I would be someone who may discourage myself from acting like this or doing this type of thing when I need to do something, like finish a project, write a thesis, or something like that. It would be maddeningly inefficient, right? When you have to do something. Like right now, my study, my review for Duolingo is getting pushed pretty substantially right now. While I need to keep myself more disciplined. So I'm working on that right now. Whoops. What was this? Oh, hey dearie. Yeah. Hi dearie. That's right. It's just so relaxing. Which makes me a little wary of how hard I'm actually working. not that learning has to be tough or challenging. I don't necessarily stray away from things that are tough or challenging. They can both be fun, not difficult, but challenging, right? I feel like when people talk about difficult and ease, they're talking about the emotional barrier in maintaining the activity. Um, the other opponent is the semantic challenge of things. I often think that is not exactly the whole story. I think it's 70% the emotional barrier and 30% the actual task involved for these type of things, for like language learning and stuff. Like memorizing something is challenging because of the emotional baggage of time, efficiency, talking to people, as opposed to the literal understanding of what this character is and all that stuff. It's the emotional baggage of how long this takes. If you get things confused, is it worth your time? At least from my understanding from interactions with people. Um, no problems like learning the things at a time, some things at a time, but the emotional impact. Thanks, Nojo. Thank you, thank you. Always appreciate it. I already get rewarded every day. I mean, I get to talk to Gecko because of WaniKani, so uh, it's already enough reward in general. I could do this for days if my voice wasn't already giving out, which it already started giving out. um, Whoops. I'm still a little bit apprehensive of what I'm like if I'm working hard enough for me to acquire things yet. Obviously, because a lot of this is still review. Most of this is still review. Man, we'll get to it eventually. It'll probably be another month, I would say. There are new things here. I think about 30% of the stuff is new most of the time. Like on average at the moment. Giving some transparency. So I remind myself that, and other people perhaps, to remember that the context is I've used Duolingo, and even if people don't believe that Duolingo teaches you something, the comments I'm making now about WaniKani is because of Duolingo. Like all the stuff, all the familiarity, and how I'm not working hard really at all to remember this stuff is because all of that is from Duolingo. So cue the Duolingo doesn't teach you anything, it doesn't help you like remember anything and all that stuff. Well, unfortunately, maybe the way I interact with it with Duolingo is different, but you know. Hey, welcome back, Jen. How was your stream? What did you do today? Oops. Oops. Oh. Elianki, you're 2K, 6K tech. What does that mean? What does oh, is it like 2K to 6K deck? As in like that's the range? But since you have the usual 1.5 RE, so you do 50 words per day. Ah, very nice. Very nice. Any particular memories that that pop out at you? When you were reviewing the words, like any particular words for your 50-word day? 2K is the most common 2K, and then 6K is for N2, I think, but also commonly used. Interesting. 6K is for the N2. Okay. I was having like an hour and a half discussion about with Gecko about preferences, things about language and the learning, and one of my particularly regular influencers or authors and published personality professional, I was sharing it with Gecko today. Talk about reading and listening to books. For now, not really new words you encounter is the pitch accent that always gets you. I kinda want to fix your pitch accent. I see. That sounds reasonable. How often do you encounter new words lately? Do you get like one every 50? Maybe one every 100? As you said, you already know the common, so basically you're restarting with a 2K, so it shows me the most common ones, like going back to level 1. So you can do so many cars, so I can do, because I don't need to memorize, only need the pitch accent. Yeah, but yeah, I think you misunderstand me. I'm not talking about literally the words have to be new. Like, did you encounter any new discoveries about the words? So, like you mentioned pitch accent. Was there any particular word that had a pitch accent that you noticed that you didn't quite notice before? Like, I know you said that. I know you said you know the common 1.5K words. You kind of linked me those things. Like, was there any particular new discoveries that you made? I'm kind of curious which particular ones when it comes to pitch accent. Like maybe Amit versus Amit. I don't know. That's the only example that comes off my head because I'm thinking about that clip of comparing Amit and Amit. Amit and Amit. Or like Kudai and Kurai. Kurai and Kurai. Right? They're isolated words because I don't practice sentences, so it could be like in the context of a whole sentence. is what you're referring to when it comes to pitch accent. Oh no. What is the mnemonic for this? Hmm. Is it really that? The screaming thing? That just gets you to Aru though. Some pitch accent in the decks are wrong, so you gotta fix it. Oh, okay. So how do you go and fix it? Do you find like a sample somewhere else? And then use it? Like replace it? So some you guess you could just use what you heard when immersing, because for example I just did in okay. Heavy and the E is like going down, but the actual pitch accent is actually staying up. I see. So I guess you'll just use Calmant. Okay. This is Kratos. Noboru. Mnemonic was Kratos. There is an Anki add-on where you can add pitch accent yourself. As for the sample, you get it from Yomitan. Okay. Sounds about. Got it. That seems very reasonable. Very efficient. Oops. Oops. Do I need to write something? Probably. The heck? Wait. Your pitch action problem is I'm used to some verbs you've used to make the last kana pitch go down because it's more easier to speak for you, but it's actually going up. That's why you need to fix it. Like the one you did just now. Nobodu? It stayed up and the do doesn't fall down. Oh. Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Interesting. Now I'm trying to think of, can you give me a predicate? Can you give me a predicate where the pitch accent goes down? So I can, like, hear it? Like, Nobodu is probably, like, I didn't process that. So can you give me an example of a predicate where you, like, do, like, up then down? I don't actually have examples in my head because they need to be triggered, so I haven't really focused on pitch accent. Yeah, like a example verb. Like you chose Nobodu, right? Nobodu, is there like is taberu, is it going down? Or like whenever you say a predicate alone, do they go down? Like I need an example of going down. Maybe like nomu. Does nomu go down? Because that sounds like it goes down. Nomu. Oh, taberu. It does go down. Okay. I see. Those are like nomu. That's those are the first two that come to mind that sound like they go down. Like, does nomu go down or is it nomu? Nomu sounds awful, by the way. So I'm guessing it's nomu, where the mu goes down. Let's see. Why am I'm drawing a, hold up. Slide, stakes. Oh yeah, that's right. The blue is throwing me off. Yeah, dude, if you say nomu, that is weird as heck. Maybe in a very, very questionable way at the end of a sentence because you're so confused. Like, sushi o nomu? Or something like really weird. But yeah, I basically took the two basic like the two first predicates that I learned and tried to do an up, and it sounded weird. Yeah, drink sushi. You see what I mean? Like it would have to be like really, really weird. Like it's so obvious that it's so uncomfortable. So drink sushi would be my example. Like, do you drink sushi? Like, not even like if you say like, do you eat sushi? Right? And you make it a question mark. It's like, but if you go too high, it's gonna sound weird. So then you add like question words. You know, you add a question at the end, like, you know, desu ka? Right? Or like a ka to make it less weird. But yeah. But no, the nomu, the mu goes down, but it goes down and then it goes back up to indicate a question. Yeah, but it would need a context for a question, in my opinion. It would have to raise a question. I think deliberately making it all question is, in my opinion, like English, where you constantly talk with an uptone. Personally, I like to be clear when I'm asking a question, but maybe that's not how Japanese goes about it. But I personally would prefer that. So you would not catch me doing that too often because it sounds weird to me. But hey, we might be, maybe I'll bump into an influencer who likes turning all their predicates into questions instead of using ka or something. Maybe. Do I mean yomu? What do you mean by yomu? Do I mean read? Does yomu go up? Oh, wait. That's still nomu. Wait, what are you? I'm so confused. That's not yomu, but nomu. Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm really confused by what you're asking there. Did I get it wrong? Like, what are you talking about? Like, why did you type nomu again? Is there another nomu? Is that, what else could I be referring to? To smoke? To take, no, that's just, oh, well, I guess you could say to take medicine. It's a different kanji. No, I don't think it would get mixed up with anything else. I mean, you don't prefer saying it like this? Oh, in uptone. an uptone ending on a predicate. So when you said, yeah, nomu goes down, going up sounds weird, but you said, but no, the nomu, it can go up because you're indicating a question. And like, I don't typically do that, right? And personally, I prefer that someone identifies the question with context. And it usually doesn't end with using your predicate going uptone to change the pitch accent in order to indicate a question. The example that I made was uncomfortable to me, right? Like, sushi o taberu? That's not something I would use very, very commonly. So for me, the pitch accent usually goes down because I don't end by shifting uptone to taberu, right? Sushi o taberu, right? Like, I don't do that very often. So it could be weird it might not be weird in the future when I hear a lot of people do that, but I would place something at the end. Like, sushi o taberu, taberu desu ka? I mean, you don't prefer saying it like this? Yeah. Oh, wait, sorry. It's not that how you say it's not. It is not that how you say is colloquial. It's not that how you say. You're gonna have to retype that. I don't really know what you're saying. You're probably either indicating, so instead of reading that English sentence, you're probably indicating colloquially as in native Japanese speakers, and I'm not saying it's a reflection of native Japanese speakers. So you're thinking in the context of what deriving the context incorrectly. I said, I don't do that. Regardless of what other people do, I do not do that, largely because of English. So it has very little to do with whether it is done colloquially or not. Is not that how you say it is not that how you say it colloquially. Like, eat sushi. I know. Churn. I know. But you don't speak formally like that a lot of times. Like, for example, do you say eat sushi in English? No. But you can possibly find examples when that happens. It was an example. Like, too restrictive. Like the way you said, is not that how you say colloquially. I understand what it says, but that's not how you say that as well. You say that is typically not said colloquially. Like, is not that how you say colloquially is not colloquial, but I can still understand it. So I don't know how people colloquially say things, so then I have no point of reference whether it's weird or not. I'm saying it's weird to provide an uptone when something is not pitched that way in standalone, right? So I know that Noboru is Noboru because not in the sense of colloquialism. It's what I hear most often, right? So being overly concerned about colloquialism is something that I find focusing on pitch accent creates a problem in communication, right? It's also one of the examples why English is constantly okay to do that and other languages are not. Also, like Chinese as well. Like, for example, in Hansa Hero, which will happen today, I'm pretty sure it will happen today, where in Hansa Hero sentences, almost all their sentences are pitched up at the end of the sentence However, in English, I typically pitch down whenever I complete a statement. So, and then when I don't complete a statement, right, and it's a question, I pitch up. That's perfectly fine. Technically, you don't have to pitch up in certain situations in Chinese, but you can pitch up willy-nilly if you want it, because the pitching up for question is kind of maybe a coincidence that Japanese, Chinese, and English has pitch ups when it comes to an uptone when it comes to questions. So you could just say sushi, like sushi, and then it's like, oh, hey, that's a question. I don't know if that's normal or not. But when you pitch anything up, like in terms of like interaction, that's probably a consequence of my English or something else. It's not a consequence of listening to native speech or whatever colloquial you have defined. It is relevant to you though, because you're trying to fix your pitch accent, right? So, I'll probably hear far more about that in the future from you, likely because I don't have a focus on pitch accent yet. Maybe if there's an app that does that, that would be interesting. I might go and test that. Generally speaking, like you said earlier, and what I said earlier, immersion would be the convenient, right? You're actively fixing your pitch accent. I am not actively fixing my pitch accent. Immersion will create the mere exposure of what my pitch accent is. So whatever I'm saying now is a reflection of my immersion. And what I mean by immersion is I include these things as immersion, by the way. I know that some people say, well, this is an immersion. You're learning through SRS. It doesn't have complete sentences and it's not a natural speak, but I'm immersing in something. I hear sounds on, well, not WaniKani. WaniKani is not an example because it doesn't actually say anything. But if I hear Duolingo all the time, that's what I'm mirroring right now. And then when I hear more things outside, then I'll mirror them. So, for myself, it's probably not that important. I guess sorry, not sorry. It's kind of the same as someone says I speak American English poorly, right? If it does lead to misunderstanding, then we'll probably solve that misunderstanding or try to solve that misunderstanding, and then I'll change my pitch accent, probably. What motivates you to change your pitch accent? What motivates you right now to focus on your pitch accent? And can you tell me how you determine that a pitch accent is wrong through Anki? Like, so I'm imagining this, right? You're doing your Anki lessons, and then somehow something sounds weird. How do you know it's wrong? Or that it needs to be fixed? Take me through like the thought process on that. Because the pitch accent is actually bulk created by an add-on, you think, so it will sometimes get it wrong and sometimes it is obvious because it doesn't match the audio recording. I'm still having trouble understanding how you know it's wrong. Is there like some sort of pitch curve or something that you're lining up I don't think that has. I think the idea that it's actually bulk created, I'm not sure. That doesn't explain how you know it's wrong. But, like, is there something that indicates where the pitch accent is supposed to be on your Anki or something? This also means that obviously I didn't watch the stream or whatever you were doing today. So, gotta keep that in mind too. Oh, this was a typo. Whoops. I did earlier today as well. Oh, does that disappear when we correct it? Oh, it does. It disappears immediately when you correct it. Oh yeah, tomorrow's a peak day, so we're not doing the review tomorrow. Wow. Yeah, tomorrow is super peak day. It's the half peak day. Okay. All right. So let's this was a typo. I typed oil instead of old. Sudo asked for the meaning and I typed sudo. So that's a typo, or that's a cannot process, did not read instructions. This one I wrote the wrong word because I rushed, so I wrote princess instead of prince. And this one is a bit questionable in terms of how flexible it is, but they specifically mean good morning, obviously. So let's cover those now. Like, you're saying something doesn't match the audio recording. What is that something is probably what I'm asking. So I'm guessing there's some sort of representation of pitch accent that you're matching to the audio recording. And that's pretty neat. I have been told that a lot of the cards also include like pitch accent graphs or something, like pitch accent notations or something like that. So I'm guessing there's like I don't know, some sort of representation like this, and then the auto recording doesn't match it. Okay, you're gonna send me a screenshot. This answer my confused question for a long time. What was the first word? I'm not going to click on this, so I guess I'll click on it later. If you're unable to explain this to me using words, then that tells me a lot about how you're learning Anki. So, through Anki. Some decks have pitch accent, some don't. Okay, that still doesn't necessarily answer how you're doing it. But I'm guessing when they have the pitch accent thing, you're comparing it to the audio recording. Is that Instagram supposed to explain to me pitch accent notation? Because I guess that's one way to, but we'll see. I will click on it later. And I was really more looking for an explanation using words. Okay, so yeah, so is that what you were comparing, right? Is that what you were comparing? Yeah, so I see it. I see it. Is that what you were comparing to the recording? And is it only for, it looks like it's only for the vocabulary word in isolation. Or in that sentence, I see. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm aware of pitch accent notation. So, I'm guessing the first video was to explain pitch accent notation or something, representation of it. And if that's what you're seeing, then yeah, that makes sense. And it's only that word, interestingly enough. Yeah, I understand. The pitch accent doesn't match up with the audio of the. So, yeah, there's a pitch accent curve. Okay, sounds reasonable. Yoka, yeah, yoka. That does sound right. Okay. Yeah. Achikasu kara. Oh no, that's not. That's not 8. It's 8 days. Yeah. Um. Yo. Yoka. Yoka kara. Oh. イギリス。イギリスに行きます。8日からイギリスに行きます。行きます。Huh. It's interesting that they don't include the pitch accent of all the rest of the sentence as well. I guess you just process that. I'm okay. It's fine. That's sufficient. Sufficient. Okay, so let's do our mnemonics. Okay. Sometime the pitch accent because of the kana came before or after it. So yeah, I'll just use common sense. Say what comes first from your mind. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it does change. I know. I know. Oh, sorry. I used the word. Yeah, I read it out loud. Yeah, yes. Yeah. The kana before and after affects the pitch accent. And it affects the particle that comes after as well. So it's fine though. I think overall the other stuff comes up so frequently, I guess, that you kind of feel it out anyways. Common sense. Okay, all right, let me do this. So, hey, spoon, winter, dry, canopy, fingers, windows, hearts, direction, stool, hand, father, old, roof, ask, arrow, door, poop, towel, life, now, hat, triceratops, ice, and stone. Okay. And then we do reeds, not beads, reeds. Okay. Reeds. I think we're gonna do O and K's as we're going, right? So man, O, nai, O, un, O, setsu, O. Yes. I, O, shou, O, I, K. You, O. I'm not gonna say O anymore. I'm just gonna write it. That's kind of weird. Might produce a pattern of adding O to the end of everything. She. Die. And guy. Okay. So, alright. What were our errors? Just write them. This is a rad. And then right. What was that? That was a vocab. Prince, not princess. Right. And since this is a vocab, let's add the read. Okay. Two more things. What were the other two things? Okay. Doo-doo. To do is what I was supposed to write, but I actually write sudo by accident. Because I saw sudo, I wrote sudo. And then, Ohio. And just exclusively good morning, right? That's it. Not too bad. Pretty chill today. Spent, about an hour and a half to 2 hours talking about topical things. Like topical things that were on my mind. Talked a little bit about the thing that you were sharing earlier today, Chern, about the AI generated shorts that kind of fed into it. All right, that's it. That's a wrap. We're gonna move on to Hanzi Hero next. Yeah, not too bad. Tomorrow's a big day. I'm gonna be pushing the review, the Duolingo Japanese review, until after tomorrow because this is probably gonna take a long time. Is that how you say Hanzi Ing? Hanzi Ing Ro? Ro? Ing Ro? Oh, Zhong. Oh, Zhong? Oh, Ing Zhong. Oh, interesting. I've never seen that Zhong before. Xiong, sorry. Xiong, sorry. Ing Xiong. Interesting. I thought they might go with like hero as in like using here and roll. Just English hero. I'm not actually sure what they call it. But you just directly is there no roll? Xiong is the closest thing to roll. I was gonna say maybe use. Oh, that would be kind of weird. Oh, you direct translate. That's hero in Chinese. Wait. Does this actually literally mean hero? It kind of sounds like hero. Ingshong. Is that a coincidence? That's got to be a coincidence, right? Ingshong. Ingshong. Shong sounds like hero, like in English. That's got to be a coincidence. Neat. Yeah, I don't actually know what they call it. They decide to name it. Do they go with the phonetic approach or the direct translation? All right, folks, we're pushing off the review because tomorrow I expect a lot of lessons. I'm dragging my feet. I am still okay. I gave myself like 2-week buffer, but now it's starting to shrink down. So for now, thanks for chilling. Fair warning, there's like an hour and a half digression in the middle of the review session, largely related to language learning, right? Very important when using tools to learn things. If that interests anyone. I am indirectly plugging someone, right? I really do like Hank Green and John Green, so it's not for everyone. However, I like to share occasionally when other people share things. I like to share things in response. So there you have it. I talk about them a lot, so hopefully it would be quite a humbling experience if one day somehow the things that I say cross paths with them. Kind of a moment. All right. So if you're gonna watch this later, arigatou gozaimasu. Until next time, mata ne, ja ne. Right. I'm gonna get up, walk around a little bit, fill my water bottle, and I'll be back for Hanzahiro. Thank you.